here is Jimmy Dore, supposedly far to the left.
Doesn't he hate the neoliberals?
Yeah, supposedly far to the left of Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart takes it to Larry Summers, and Jimmy Dore has on a guy to the right of Larry Summers, if you can believe it, who's leaning on Larry Summers. When you hear the words neoliberal, what it actually refers to are the libertarians who came out of Mont Pelerin in 1947, 48, and devised plans in which to push their neoliberal economic agenda, which is essentially the only time we want government interference of the market is really to help industry. That is basically what that neoliberal term means. David Sachs and his buddy Peter Thiel are exactly those people. They are the descendants of that ideology. And now it just so happens he also has a stake in Rumble, significant stake in Rumble, and also in Callin, and all of these other media outlets. And so who do you look for if you want somebody to explain the bank coverage and you're a lefty? Well, of course, Peter Thiel or David Sachs.
Guy invested in your company.
Exactly.
It's the largest upward transfer of wealth in human history. And they did it under the guise of helping workers, which is just... And
he's talking about CARES.
How much did that affect the inflation? So that had to be...
Pause it. Now, understand, like, CARES Act was in... He's talking about the CARES Act from 2020. There was the Inflation Reduction Act, the industrial planning, but really the American Rescue Act. Like 70% of that went directly to people. The the one that was passed by the Democrats when they controlled everything in 2020, or I should say, yeah, after the inauguration, right, in 2021. Sachs will slag that. Remember, that is the bill that cut child poverty by 35%.
Yeah, that's the one they really like to tee off on.
But Sachs' story is all that spending created inflation, and the Fed should have risen their rates earlier to discipline, and nothing about regulation, incidentally, on these banks. Doesn't come up until minute 38 of a 41-minute video. And only long enough for Dore to say, like, well, it's really, why didn't the Democrats, return it?
Yeah, bipartisan.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm a comedian. I'm not an economist.
Right.
But if you flood the market with $5 trillion, how does that not produce rising interest? I mean, inflation, right?
Oh, pause it. I'll tell you how that happens. There's a tremendous amount of slack in the economy because nobody's working. Nothing's being produced. That's how it does not create inflation. He's going to go on, Sachs is going to go on and talk about QE and this and QE. And we heard it all in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, how we were going to be Weimar.
It's just so interesting to me that Jimmy Dore's framing is of Larry Summers. It's identical.
Well, here it comes.
Rising interest. I mean, inflation, right?
Yeah. So all this did begin, the sort of latest phase of easing began during COVID, where all of a sudden, well, remember, we had this COVID swoon in Q2 of 2020, where if you looked at the year over year numbers, it looked like a 30% decline in the economy because of the lockdowns, something crazy like that. I mean, it looked like we're headed into a Great Depression. And so the Fed and the federal government threw everything they had at that problem. They, printed tons of money. It was QE on overdrive. Rates were basically zero. And, they started doing all of these acts that, were basically COVID relief bills. We can debate the quality of those bills. I haven't looked at that closely at what was in them. You're probably right about that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the money didn't go to the right places. But I would tell you that I think that was the start of this thing. And so I think you can definitely lay blame in a bipartisan way. But I do think that when you then got into Q1 of 2021,
Positive.
That was
Q1 of 2021 is when the American Rescue Act was passed. the one that paid $300 per kid for each parent, the ones that had extended unemployment, the ones that provided extensions on health insurance, Medicaid, that reduced the costs of the Affordable Care Act for people who were eligible for subsidies. None of it sufficient, much of it necessary. Again, cut child poverty by 35%. Go ahead.
Got into Q1 of 2021, that was a new phase because the economy had recovered. In fact, it was a pretty hot recovery by Q1 of 2021. And then Biden passed the American Rescue Plan, which is another $2 trillion of COVID relief along straight party lines. And you'll remember that Larry Summers at that time warned the administration, guys, I think you're taking a big risk here. This could really cause inflation. And, the administration sort of poo-pooed, said, oh, this is Larry being a troublemaker. And they disregarded it. And I think that was really the start of a whole new phase of problems. And then later that summer, when the inflation began to hit, it hit like 4 months later, again, that 5% print, they should have slowed down, but they kept going. Foot on the gas pedal. We then had, over $1 trillion of infrastructure. We had the Build Back Better bill. You had the Inflation Reduction Act. You had the CHIPS Act. And so they kept spending and spending.
Sounds like we need austerity.
And then at the same time, the Fed kept printing and printing. And so we entered a new phase of this thing where I think that just as the indicators were telling us, hey, we have an inflation problem, they didn't slow down. They kept printing and spending. And I think that's why the result of that,
we
just
shouldn't spend so much
cut to
money.
the chase here, is that
what you're
we've
saying?
now, for the last year,
I'm
had the
just a
most rapid
comedian.
rate tightening cycle I think we've ever seen in our lifetimes.
When you say rate tightening, you mean interest rates rising. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the Fed, they control the Fed funds
I'm
rates,
just a
the
comedian,
overnight.
but I can't be responsible for the person I put on my platform and then say this is good ideas.
Yeah.
I would be ready to push back at you, but first I need you to define basic concepts like rate hike.
Also, let me ask you this. What will happen to my algorithm on Rumble? Am I going to be able to get inflated numbers? Will that help me? Will I be able to get some advertising? No, the important thing to me is really spread the truth and have neoliberal policies on
It's just so weird.
that are citing Larry Summers.
Yeah, it's just so weird that he didn't push back on the Larry Summers point at all, right? Because in 2020 he was criticizing the Biden administration. Well, I sent this. It's not even necessary, but he tweeted in April 2020 making fun of the Biden administration for hiring Larry Summers to screw workers and families even harder. Larry fucking Summers, you can't make this up. You know the thing? It's just. All of this is just a way to screw Democrats, and now he's just completely bought in to neoliberal austerity politics by having this guy on. And it's just when he said neoliberal constantly, Jimmy Dore, I know, sorry, that screenshot didn't come out that great. But when he was talking about neoliberals constantly as a way to attack Democrats, just know that that's exactly what it is. Right. It's just a word that people know is bad.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of those things.
The definition of neoliberal politics right there.
Yeah,
right there.
Without a doubt.
Right there. And good on David Sachs, who's really diversifying his corruption portfolio here, making inroads with grifters like Jimmy Dore, and again, hosting a fundraiser with Ro Khanna, who people have been suspicious about for a while and now definitely should be, with multi-$1,000 plate buy-ins
building bridges.
He's fundraising for Ron DeSantis, fundraise for JD Vance, Blake Masters, now Ro Khanna, and guest on the Jimmy Dore show. So just
he's doing the whole round of the Rumble folks, and he's getting out there because there was some there was stories out there that Sachs, in part, had contributed to this bank run because, like David Dayen told us, the number of depositors in this bank was pretty limited.
Yeah.
And Sachs himself admits that many companies from his portfolio, of which he is a venture capitalist and investing in, have their money in this bank. And so he's out there, and I think he probably on some level was had it in the ether People were worried about their money. That it enhanced the bank run. Again, we know the cascading reasons for this, starting with the rollback on regulation for banks these size. Then, starting with that same statute, allowed for the Fed to roll it back even more. Mm-hmm. And then all the other subsequent things. But if this guy's argument was true, you would see bank failures outside of the stadium-sized banks. If it was just a function of like, well, no one could have predicted that rates would go up. Like essentially his argument is you would see these failures happening in other places, but no, they're too small to be, doing these risky over-leveraged bets. And had they been subject to regulation, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he has Sachs, invites Sachs on to make the point that Sachs is really interested in making, which is that I didn't, my alarmism all over Twitter saying, my Chicken Little act, that was just after it was in receivership. So don't blame me. I'm just the messenger. But you set up the momentum to bail out these depositors.
Yes.
Well, that's the point. And the reason why he did that, where they made it seem like this was a systemic failure, was to justify the bailing out of those depositors.
And I'm pretty sure that they deny that, or he gives him Jimmy asked him about if it was a bailout or not. Does he waffle on?
Oh, he says not a bailout.
Yeah, not a bailout.
Not a bailout.
The limits of anti-establishment politics, it's as shallow as a puddle. This is what you end up being, essentially, because the establishment can shift. It's basically just reactionary, like I hate daddy. It leads you down this road where you're completely untethered to the so-called principles that you espouse when you first got your start, of being anti-neoliberal, anti these kinds of ghouls who want everything to be left to the market, anti people who want to dismantle the regulatory state so corporate profits can gouge. You're having one of the number one people in this nation responsible for that kind of stuff. PayPal buddies with Peter Thiel, writing books with him about how diversity is hurting this country, on your program, and spouting the same bullshit that Hillary Clinton neoliberal shill was all about. Like Jimmy Dore's politics are closer to Hillary Clinton than anybody in that space right now, or that he's talking, certainly than us.
Oh yeah, I mean,
she's a woman.
That's the thing, is like they I think like when people accuse them of secretly working with the Republicans, because it obscures the actual fact, which is that they also work for the corporate Democrats by naturalizing their power over the party.
Corporate Democrat Jimmy Dore.